couple weeks ago, I had the ability to go to a candlelight vigil where a Utah Peace House representative read names off of a list. 19 names were read off of this list. People who are aged from 3 to 70. People of both sexes, people of all races, people who are gay and straight, people who are educated and people who are not, people who are rich and people who are poor. And though there may be high rates of domestic violence in certain demographics, domestic violence is an issue pressing on all of us. But firstly, what is domestic violence? It's not exactly a short definition. Though the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence defines it as, quote, the willful intimidation, physical and sexual abuse as a pattern of power and control, end quote. Domestic violence is not just physical and sexual. It is physical, sexual, emotional, and mental abuse. And yes, it is a pattern of power and control. It is the abuser imposing rule over the victim. It's incredibly important to know this definition when we start to actualize the people who are affected. Over 10 million men and women are affected by domestic violence each year. And although our initial instinct may be to put them in bar graphs and charts and such, we must actualize these people individually because they all have mental, physical, and emotional capabilities just like you and me. Every single one of them faces the impacts of domestic violence, which just in the physical realm has been linked to an increase in hypertension, cancer, and other cardiovascular diseases. So not only are victims being abused by their abuser, but they are also subjected to massive medical bills and massive stresses, which just add up, and they don't just stop with the body. The mental effects are astronomical. Domestic violence has been linked to an increase in PTSD, addictive behaviors, and suicidal behaviors. I've seen this not only on the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence website, but also in my own domestic sphere. Because I've seen my brother not only with hand marks around his neck, but abuse substances frequently. I've seen my sister not only with bruises on her body, talk about taking her own life. And I've seen my father not only with memories too harsh to share, talk about how his wife was worse than war. Because maybe the kid in the back of the class is weird for a reason. Maybe he doesn't do his homework because he's hanging out with his friends because he's scared of spending another 30 seconds around his parents. Maybe he insists on going to parent-teacher conference night alone because he doesn't want his parent to lash out. Maybe he doesn't socialize in class because he's scared that someone will close his mouth. Maybe he doesn't participate in talks about virginity with the other immaturity springs because he didn't get to choose where he lost his, but be sure as hell his parents did. Maybe he's mad at the world because his parents chose not to be around him. Maybe he carries himself like his friends more than his parents because his parents didn't do the parenting. Because when you're orphaned, your parents didn't choose to leave you, but when they beat you, be sure as hell they chose that. It doesn't just stop with parents. When you're shown that people your own age have the same capacity of hatred, you start to forget they have the same capacity for love as well. When your brother is mimicking your parents so alike that you can't tell a difference in the beatings, that's a perfect example of the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. When all 4 of your kids want to kill themselves, there's your correlation, but the causation is just further up the familial road. So how the hell do we fix this? People are affected in a numerous amount of ways. So what do we do? We've thrown money at the problem. We haven't seen much difference. We have coalitions and government actions, so something should be happening, right? Not exactly. We've moved this into the realm of a social issue. We have stopped working in tandem with the government to try to minimize domestic violence. We have created a society where this is allowed. I agree with James Madison in Federalist Paper 10 when he says the only way to get rid of interest groups is to remove the causes and control the effects. The same can be said about domestic violence, though I agree for both. Removing the causes. We must break down this familial cycle of abuse. We currently subside in this normalization of abuse. We subside in these harmful behaviors. We subside and laugh at jokes about victims. We make fun of them as if it's okay. So what we must do is stop normalizing this behavior. When you flip on your TV and you see Family Guy, an 18-year running show based off of cutaway jokes and harm, and you see Peter Griffin trying to kill his kids in a new way, that's normalization. When you switch over to Simpsons, a 28-year-old running show with only the abuse part, and you allow that to subside and abuse, when you flip on your radio and listen to the Love the Way You Lie, performed in 2010 by Rihanna and Eminem, hitting the top 10 charts in the US, that's the normalization that I'm talking about. And it's not just media. I understand that, and I'm sure you do as well. It's all of us. We don't speak up when we hear jokes being made. We listen to these songs, we watch these TV shows as if they're the best thing ever. And sure, we can have great TV shows that don't allow for abuse, and we can have great songs that don't normalize that behavior. We have to start doing that. We can't just say that's the next generation's problem. Next, we can begin to control the effects. We can work in tandem with the government. The Violence Against Women Act of 1994 diverted $1.6 billion towards the conviction of abusers. Though if an abuser moves from state to state, they won't be prosecuted by the police, only prosecuted by courts, meaning they need to be brought before them. But that's the police's job. You see the issue. I know that system too well because that's what my mother did. She fled Utah, and now she's walking around freely. Next, we can begin to listen to victims. I understand that might seem like a go happy lucky solution or something like that. But it's not just simply a measly thing. Listening to a victim can incredibly help the healing process, though we must take into account 3 major strategies when we do so. 1, actualize their age. That may sound weird, but just treat the person like the age they are. If you use an incredibly soft voice, trying to be as comforting as possible with just your voice, they may come across as like this 4-year-old. They may come across as someone who does not understand that people speak at a neutral tone. Then they start to forget that they are people as well, and that can incredibly slow the healing process. Secondly, if you're going to hug them or hold their hand and try to comfort them that way, ask first. The victim was just subjected to abuse without their consent, so asking for their consent can do a lot in the healing process. And lastly, realize the healing process isn't instant. It's not like they go to therapy and they're better. Therapy is needed to combat the mental effects, but therapy is continuous. The healing process is a day-by-day assurance. It never really ends. Something else we can do to control the effects is start to report domestic violence more. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence theorizes that only 1% of cases of domestic violence are actually reported. This is incredibly important to go ahead and actualize. If we don't, then we realize that victims of domestic violence may be victimized multiple times, or multiple people may be being abused, though those cases aren't being reported and those abusers aren't facing justice. My hypothesis on why people are hiding their stories is because we've cultivated a society where it's not okay to talk about that, where you're considered a soft wimp if you talk about your experiences, or you're defined by your experiences, not by your moral character. We have created a society where that is not okay. So as people, we must go ahead and move our society into a society of acceptance, where we do not define people about what has happened to them, but about who they are. And lastly, before I leave you, I want to reference some of those stories I told you about. I'm a 74-year-old grandmother who has not seen her grandson in years because I'm scared of him. I'm a middle-aged father who stays in a motel because I'm scared of what my wife will do to me. I'm the girlfriend who got thrown into a ditch and shot by my boyfriend. I am the son of an immigrant family who transitioned their childhood onto me. I am a victim of domestic violence, and I'm not going anywhere.